Salutations, my slimy society. Sugar Pants back from the basement with a stagnant cinematic selection for you all. 1988's Destroyer, a greasy gala about a botched execution and the meat-headed monstrosity it failed to kill. I like to think of this one as what would happen if you took Jason's strength and sadism and crossed it with Freddy's puerile personality. So let's fire up that sleaze docket and see what this Dead Man Walk-In's got for us all. We have 7 dead bodies, 9 cups blood, 12 naked breasts, 6 naked butts, 6 naked bajingos, baby doll jump scare, 1 sexy but short shared shower, 1 all-girl nude shower fight, 1 snapped neck, 1 acetylene torch roastin', 1 shovel to the face, 1 jackhammered cop, 1 sash strangulation, 1 noose strangulation, 1 severed head in the copier, death by electric chair, 1 exploding eyeball, scissor lickin', scissors to the leg, motorcycle clothesline, rock crushed skull, 1 exploding human torch, and 1 vibrating electric doll. We kick things off with a slow pan across a prison that's clearly seen better days. Ivan Moser, a death row inmate, is catching up on his game shows while the priest heads towards his cell to read him his last rites. The priest asks for the TV to be turned off, but Ivan demands it be left on. The priest then asks repeatedly if Ivan would like to finish his last meal, but all he wants is one of the contestants to get a B. Clearly this man is not worried about his impending electric death. The guards lead him towards the chair in handcuffs while the audience watches. And for some reason, the game show audio is still playing and syncing up nicely with the real-world events.
Today, our fabulous prize package includes a genuine leather swivel rocker recliner featuring adjustable head and foot positions, padded roll-over arms, and magic massage with computer memory.
The priest reads from the Bible, but Ivan continues to ignore him. They ask if he'd like a cigarette or a last request, but Ivan just wants the TV turned around so he can see the contestants get a B. In walks the cowboy warden to read the charges.
You've been sentenced to die in the electric chair for the rape and murder of 23 men, women, and children. You have any last statements?
24.
Hey, Patrick.
What?
I thought of something funnier than 24.
Let me hear it.
25.
The generator charges up and the executioner begins to pull the lever, raising the amount of current being sent into Ivan when suddenly the power goes out. The physician goes to check on Ivan's body, but he ain't dead. He grabs the priest by the throat, snaps his neck, and chucks him through the window. He corners the executioner and pulls its mask off and...
Oh, it's a lady.
Oh, it was just a dream. The woman in the dream wakes up and we see the priest is lying in bed next to her. Susan immediately gets up and starts pulling newspaper clippings off the wall, clearly upset at her boyfriend's research into killers. In reality, they both work in Hollywood. David was researching real executions for a movie they're both working on. He starts to get a little intimate as his way of apologizing, but the alarm goes off before we get anything fun, and we cut to a Benny Hill skit already in progress. You know, this seems a lot more rapey without the yakety sax and the laugh track going on. Awesome! It's a women's prison movie, and they're filming on location at an actual abandoned prison. Sharon Fox, the lead, is not happy about filming conditions and ruins the take. At the local diner, they're watching the All Exposition channel that just so happens to be doing a story about our movie. Turns out the abandoned prison was the scene of a riot 18 months ago, and that David's research into the facility has uncovered the real reason for the riot. Apparently the inmates weren't being treated very well, and specifically names Warden Frank Karsh for his involvement. And he just happens to be the very diner customer watching! Boy, I love movies where everything lines up like this. Just imagine if Karsh had decided to stay home and make his own breakfast that morning. Karsh angrily ashes his coffee, pays his tab, and storms out. The reporter continues by announcing that the prison's riot was the worst in the nation's history, resulting in the death of 13 guards and 37 inmates. The riot started during the execution of Ivan Moser, who was convicted of, quote, torture slaying 23 people, including game show hostess Susan Starr. So I suppose the majority of the dream sequence actually makes sense. David and Susan arrive at the prison where a cab driver is delivering a package that David signs for. The driver says he's been waiting half an hour for someone to show up. David asks why he didn't just go in, and the driver says he wouldn't dare step inside the prison knowing its history. And what's he delivering? A fresh body. Back inside, Sharon is about to be shot, but the effects guy, Rewire, is having a little trouble with the squibs. Just then, Karsh rolls up looking madder than a mosquito in a mannequin factory. David carries the dummy through the facility and passes by the caretaker, Russell, who comments that it looks just like Sharon and asks if it has
Tits and everything.
David confirms it does and continues towards the effects crew, but an angry voice calls Russell in the opposite direction. Turns out it's Karsh, demanding that Russell open the gate and heads up to see the movie people. Susan is wandering alone and finds a note attached to a jump scare doll, and someone is watching from the shadows. David finally gets the dummy down into the basement where Rewire is working on an electric chair. David goes to check it out and sparks fly. Rewire tells him it's running 2,000 volts, but doesn't consider anything odd about leaving it on until David tells him what that kind of juice can do to a person. Rewire hands David a boot that he had to chisel off of the floor, and David realizes it once belonged to Ivan. Then Rewire speculates that they might find Ivan himself.
No, maybe he's like that guy in the Halloweens that keeps getting killed, but Bobby Ewing's wife keeps waking up.
Okay, that was pretty good. Karsh is still skulking around and makes his way to the men's room, where he doesn't notice the loud-ass clanging of a two-wheeler being hauled up the steps until it's literally in front of the stall. Whoever it is lights the torch and flame broils the old warden. The crispy Karshi is then dragged away. Back on set, Susan is dressed in a Sharon Fox wig to perform a fall stunt in the actress's place. The crew applauds and the judges score the fall, and on to the next scene. The Sharon dummy is set up in the electric chair, and Rewire gives a nice monologue explaining the setup, specifically how the public utilities wouldn't allow prisons to use their electricity for executions, so prisons had their own generators, and that's the power source he's using for the scene. He turns on the juice, and the doll starts a-jiggling. Unfortunately, the power is too much, and the doll literally gets fried. The prison's power blows, and the emergency lockdown procedures slam and lock the door to the chair as well as the front gate. So now, nobody's going anywhere. Rewire says the only way to fix it is to go downstairs to the boiler room and reset the auxiliary. He hands a walkie-talkie to David and Susan, and they head to the elevator, which conveniently runs on emergency power. Down in the basement, they find the assembly works where the prisoners used to make emergency flashers. And they're all on. Rewire says Russell must have turned them on because he's afraid of the dark or something. After some spoopy clanks and shadows, David falls into the sewer. Russell shows up just in time to help him out, but only after he's accosted by rats, cockroaches, and a human hand. Once out, Russell explains to David that the pit used to be where they kept Ivan. Russell resets the power, notices Karst's roasted corpse floating in the water, and seals the room back up, not at all surprised to see him. David makes a beeline for the shower and is joined by Susan. And we're supposed to think this is hot and all, but all I can think of is how he was just fully submerged in a pool of liquid shit. And I don't care who the hell you are. You go swimming in the sewer, you're going to be taking at least 2 showers before I go kissing all up on you. Unless it was Julie Brown. With the power restored, the crew goes back to filming, and we see Sharon's skills.
I'm innocent! Stop!
Cut!
Susan's working on a pair of trick handcuffs that I'm sure won't come into play later in the movie, while David gives a lackluster proposal telling her she doesn't have to work stunts anymore. She handcuffs him to the Sharon dummy and walks away. A motorcycle cop shows up and starts wandering around the prison. Meanwhile, Robert is told the agency won't send any more extras for prison guards, so they get Russell into costume. While waiting for his scene, the motorcycle cop runs into him and pokes fun at his new career. The cop asks if Russell has seen Karst, but he says not since yesterday. But the cop points out that Karst's vehicle is parked out front. Suddenly, Russell thinks he knows where they can find him and leads him downstairs. The director says they need Russell for the scene, and Susan heads off to find him. Instead, she finds another creepy doll with a note and an emergency flashing light. David accidentally scares her, and she blames him for the doll, but when she goes to point it out to him, it's gone. Down in the basement, Russell excuses himself to the bathroom and locks the door. The cop pulls his gun and tries to peep inside. Suddenly, a fist bursts through the door and slams the cop's head a few times. Oh, what a surprise! It's Ivan! The cop smacks him in the face with the shovel, but Ivan doesn't even flinch. The cop crawls for his gun, but Ivan gets there first with a jackhammer, crushing it. He then turns towards the cop, running him through and pinning him to the wall. Back at the electric chair, Sharon is, acting her way through her execution. Lame screams and half-hearted effort until Robert gives the signal and they turn on some actual electricity. Understandably, Sharon is pissed off, but the director says he took a turn first to make sure it was safe and that not telling her would get a more natural reaction. Unfortunately, it works all too well, and Sharon throws a gigantic hissy fit that would make even Christian Bale blush.
I hate you! All right, that's lunch.
Sharon finds a bottle of booze in her wardrobe and pours herself a glass. She then heads down memory lane to her pageant days, eventually walking back to the set to drink in the electric chair and sob over what her career has become. Meanwhile, Russell moves the warden's car to a less noticeable location. Some of the other crew make it to the nearby diner where the starstruck waitress tells them their fry cook is a bit of a celebrity himself. Turns out he's the one who threw the switch on old Ivan, and David jumps at the opportunity to get more insider information. Once done with lunch, David stays after to ask the cook some questions. Sharon stumbles her way into the service elevator, which automatically sends her to the basement. Eventually, she makes it to an office where Ivan is watching TV. Now, why is her initial reaction to scream? She has no idea who he is or that he's dangerous. For all she knows, it could just be a member of the crew taking a break. This prison's kind of full of people making a movie. Is it really so strange to think a stuck-up, past-her-prime actress doesn't know everyone by name or face? Anyway, Sharon takes off screaming into the darkness, but manages to hold on to that bottle the whole time. She runs into Russell, who attacks her with her sash. She smashes that bottle upside his head, and he falls to the floor below, and it looks like he snapped his neck. Ivan slinks up behind her and strangles her with the sash. The crew is setting up the skin portion of the movie, both the one we are watching and the one they are making. A nice little meta moment here. And even though Sharon isn't there, Robert insists they do it without her and tries to get Susan to stand in. But she's just a stunt woman, not stunt tits or stunt ass, and she refuses. Robert tells her to go get the wig from the dummy, and they'll just do some back-of-the-head shots. Back at the diner, David's still pressing the cook for info, but he's not interested in talking. And now comes the movie's full force of nudity, and it's just easier to describe it. It's a shower fight with 6 fully nude women, although 2 of them have their hair wrapped up in towels, so it's somewhat conservative. The ladies wrestle and get wetter and steamier while Robert barks orders throughout the scene. Unfortunately, it's not as closed of a set as they thought it was, because Ivan's getting a nice little peep show. They do a cut, hose the girls down, then back to the fight. It's gratuitous, it's unnecessary, it's gloriously fabulous! Susan makes it to the electric chair and is a bit weirded out by the dummy, but completely misses the real Sharon hanging in the corner. She makes it back to the set and finds a doll head in a jar spinning on the reel-to-reel, as well as some bloody words on the tile, and takes off running. She gets on the radio and calls Rewire, who's down at the master control, hanging by a noose? Wait, when the hell did he get offed? Oh, he's just testing out the hanging rig. Susan asks where everyone is and tells him the power's acting up again. He throws a few switches and the lights come back on, but Rewire doesn't answer. Instead, a new voice introduces himself as Officer Callahan and says there seems to be a problem in the boiler room. Oh no, it's Ivan in the motorcycle cop's uniform. And Rewire's dead for real this time. Of course, all I can focus on is the fact that this tiny fucking motorcycle cop's uniform fits the monster-sized Ivan so well. David's not giving up on his investigative look into what happened at the prison and finally gets the cook to open up by telling him others think he's crazy and he should set the record straight. That's when he says,
"It ain't easy to kill Ivan Moser."
And he kept giving him more and more power until the generator gave out. David asks if he's still alive, and the cook says he's
half alive.
Whatever the fuck that means. And then he drops a bombshell on us. Russell is Ivan's dad! Holy shit! Wait. So the fuck what? I don't think that was the massive twist they were playing it up to be. I mean, who the fuck cares? Susan runs back to the office and finds Tommy's severed head in the copier. She then runs to the front gate to find it locked and the controls inoperable. She then hears someone screaming for help in the execution chamber. She pulls the cloth off their head, and it's the director. Unfortunately, she doesn't get to the controls before the power comes back on, and Robert is fried and his eyeballs burst. Officer Moser shows up just then, and Susan runs to him. He grabs her hair and forces her to look at Robert, but she gets away while he admires his work. Jason walks after her and catches up at the front gate, which is the exact moment David makes it back. Ivan carries her back to the electric chair, picks up a pair of scissors, and starts eating snips of her hair. Susan grabs another pair of scissors and jams him in the leg. After a laugh, he's back to chasing her. Outside, David is trying to break the gate open. Fortunately, the effects crew has a handy box of explosives on their truck. Susan finds Rewire's remote control and fires off all of his squibs.
Bitch!
Man, he sure says bitch a lot!
David finds a stack of dynamite and blows the gate just as Susan recreates her stunt fall from earlier. Unfortunately, the cloth bin she falls in isn't quite as forgiving as the air cushion she had before, and she's not very quick to get back up. Ivan picks her up and carries her back to the electric chair. He starts pawing her and licking the blood from her head, and eventually binds her with handcuffs. He puts the headband down on her and tells her he's going to bring her a present. Ivan makes his way back to the service elevator just as David catches up and follows after him using the stairs. Oh, would you look at that? Susan finally figured out those trick handcuffs like we all knew she would an hour ago. David catches up to Ivan, but is another person fooled by the uniform. Ivan flips on the lights and starts manhandling David. Meanwhile, Susan is setting the Sharon dummy up in her place and attaching jumper cables to the bars. Susan throws the switch and fries Ivan for the second time in his life. But apparently now he's still a quarter alive or something because his eyes pop open after a brief rest. Susan makes her way downstairs to David and jinxes the whole damn thing by saying,
"Everything's gonna be okay. We're safe now."
And they climb into the warden's car. Susan opens the gate and starts the engine. Oh, thank God, we're not even going to try the car won't start for no reason cliche. But it doesn't really matter because Ivan's on top of the car without so much as a dent noise. He grabs David's head and Susan stomps on the gas. Ivan lifts David up and out of the car completely, and Susan crashes into barrels of gas. David jumps on the cop's motorcycle and guns it towards Ivan, who clotheslines David and chucks him back into the car. And before we move on, I want to give some kudos to the movie for actually taking time to set up why these vehicles are down in the basement at all. Thank you, movie, for not being lazy dicks and skipping the tiny detail of Russell hiding them. Susan takes off running, and again, Ivan continues to stalk his final victim. She makes it down to the basement office and finds about 4 dead members of the effects crew. Suddenly, Russell pops out from the corner. I guess he didn't break his neck after all? He grabs Susan and opens the sewer cell, and they both fall in. Russell starts begging for help and pulls Susan into the water with him. She grabs a rock and bashes his skull in. She tries climbing out, and Ivan grabs her hands and yanks her out of the pit. He corners her and says,
It's just you and me now.
And she lights him up with the torch. He falls into the cell with a canister that explodes almost immediately, and Ivan's screams are silenced. Susan checks on the body and closes the door on the cell. Skip ahead a bit, and Susan is recovering in the hospital. We see a cart wheeled in, and when the curtain is pulled back, it's Ivan looking more like Freddy Krueger. He peels off his ear and eats it, and Susan wakes up from the obvious dream. In reality, she's sitting next to David's hospital bed. Looks like the two are going to be okay. The scene blur fades out, and the credits roll. And thus concludes Destroyer. Honestly, not a bad movie, but I feel like a lot of the concepts would have been better if they had some kind of general direction. This one came with a lot of questions. For instance, why did Ivan only show up when other people came back to the prison? What's the significance of Russell being Ivan's dad? Why was Ivan so impervious to electrical death? I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't need a movie to spell out every single detail. I just think this one could have been improved greatly if the details were a little more than surface level. It's still a fun bit of brain-dead amusement, though. Strangely enough, the 80s seemed a little obsessed with the idea of people being executed by electric chair and coming back, as 1987's Prison, 1988's Destroyer, and 1989's The Horror Show, aka House 3, and Shocker all featured that plot point. Technically, that trend kept going with 1990's Ernest Goes to Jail, but that one wasn't quite as gruesome as the others. Deborah Foreman played our final girl Susan, and there's a pretty fair chance you recognize her from other works, including 1983's Valley Girl, Real Genius, My Chauffeur, April Fool's Day, Waxwork, as well as the part of Shop Girl in the 2020 remake of Valley Girl. David was played by Clayton Rohner, who's had a pretty decent career for himself. 4 episodes of Hill Street Blues, Just One of the Guys, April Fool's Day, Sometimes They Come Back for More, all 22 episodes of Good vs. Evil, and The Human Centipede 3. Lyle Alzado played our hulking, half-dead detractor Ivan, but got his start as a defensive lineman for the Cleveland Browns, Oakland Raiders, and Denver Broncos, which included being a team player during the Raiders' 1983 Super Bowl victory over the Washington racist team name that took 86 years to change. Other projects you may have seen him in include 1 episode of Amazing Stories, Ernest Goes to Camp, Tapeheads, Zapped Again, and the short-lived Canadian sitcom Learning the Ropes. Of course, any horror fan should have immediately recognized the in-movie director, Robert, as the iconic Anthony Perkins, most famously known as Norman Bates. He racked up 67 acting credits during his 39-year career, but in a fun bit of trivia, Anthony was not the original choice for this movie. Roddy McDowall was originally cast, but had to back out, and Mr. Perkins replaced him on short notice. So until I greet you ghastly groupies again for another torturous tale, this is your old pal Sugar Pants. See you in your dreams.
Everybody back in an hour. We'll do the shower scene.
I understood that reference.